Every day, the world moves on as it always has. Cities wake up, work begins, and life feels familiar. But beneath that sense of normality, something is shifting. The climate is changing, and the systems we rely on, energy, food, water, cities, finance, are under pressure in ways we're only beginning to understand. These changes don't live in reports or projections, they are already shaping people, livelihoods, and communities. We created the Climate Leadership Podcast so these challenges don't remain abstract or distant, but are explored through the people working inside these systems, making real decisions with real consequences, often without clear answers. This is not a space for fear, blame, or perfection. It's a space for honest conversations about what leadership looks like in a changing world. If you're listening, you're already part of that leadership. Let's begin the conversation.
Welcome to another episode of the Climate Leadership Podcast, where we speak with leaders who are working at the forefront of climate action, sustainability, and innovation. Today's conversation focuses on an often overlooked but incredibly powerful driver of climate impact: sustainable procurement and supply chains. Across industries, and particularly in the built environment, supply chains often account for the largest share of emissions. From the materials used in the construction industry to the sourcing decisions made by procurement teams, these choices shape the environmental footprint of entire projects and organizations. Our guest today is Mr. Ian Fuller, a sustainability and ESG leader with more than 20 years of experience driving sustainable transformation across the built environment. Ian has worked across transport infrastructure, civil engineering, commercial real estate, and power grid integration. His work spans the full life cycle of assets, from strategy and design to construction, operation, and asset management, with a focus on creating long-term environmental and social value. Ian is also deeply involved in advancing innovation in sustainability, including the adoption of low-carbon materials, the development of digital tools to support innovation pipeline, and collaboration with startups and industry leaders through the UK Green Building Council's Innovation and Solutions Forum. In today's episode, we will explore how procurement decisions can shape climate outcomes, how organizations can engage suppliers in sustainability efforts, and why supply chains may be one of the most powerful yet underutilized levers of climate action. Thank you, Ian, for giving us your time today.
Thank you, Amber, and delighted to be here.
Okay, so let's get started. To begin, could you tell us a bit about your journey into sustainability and ESG and what led you to focus on the built environment?
Yeah, of course. When I first started out, careers in sustainability didn't really exist in the way that they do today. Environmental management was the main entry point, and it was largely focused on compliance. So I studied environmental science at Plymouth University, and I began my career with a main contractor, working on environmental assessments and managing environmental requirements on site. So from the beginning, my experience has been delivery focused, whether that's in construction or on design and on the asset management side. But it's always been about finding practical solutions, making sure sustainability is understood and implemented, not just talked about. Over the last 20 years, what's been really interesting is seeing how the agenda has evolved from quite a narrow focus on compliance, and now it's much broader, covering carbon, climate change, biodiversity, social value, and ESG in the sort of wider business context as well. More recently, with my own consultancy, BL3, which I set up in 2024, I've had the opportunity to work more closely with SMEs and also with innovators. So that's often the people that are driving change and bringing new solutions to market. So during the career, I've become a chartered environmentalist. a full member of ISEP, the Institute of Sustainability and Environmental Professionals, but I think it's really looking at how decisions are made early, how procurement and design can transform the sustainability side of projects and contracts. And really, I've always looked to bridge the gap between strategy and delivery. And I guess that's what we're here to talk about today.
Sounds good. So, Ian, many people think about sustainability in terms of operations or energy use, but less about procurement. Why are supply chains such a critical part of climate challenge?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's largely because our biggest impacts are driven by what is bought and where that's procured from, how it's made. So when people are looking at things like scope 3 emissions, you'll hear sort of numbers like 3/4 of emissions could be from scope 3. And I guess in some sectors, and depending on whether you make or own things, that supply chain side can be much bigger than that, much larger. So I think historically there's been more of a focus on what's in direct control of organizations, but really the biggest proportion and the least addressed areas are now in the supply chains and where things are procured.
Right. Yeah. Scope 3, I think, is the biggest sector, is biggest domain for every company, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, when you hear, or if you've been following kind of the sustainability agenda, you'll hear people complaining about scope 3 or saying how difficult it is. I think really what they're talking about there is how difficult it is to understand, that supply chain piece. And there is obviously a downstream side of this as well, but really in infrastructure construction, you could be looking at sort of 70 to 90% of your emissions and it being in that supply chain. And there's such a need to take action, but address that at the right time. Often, if you're already on site, you've missed the window for this change and sort of adoption. But it is really important area to sort of follow through to that site delivery as well.
Okay. So, from your experience, what are the biggest barriers organizations face when trying to integrate sustainability into procurement decisions?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest issue to date has been that they've been quite separate functions, basically, and sustainability requirements are yet to be fully embedded in procurement requirements, and that's why we have a bit of a disconnect. I think in lots of projects there's great aspiration on sustainability, but the delivery at scale can be can be prevented just because the procurement side of things doesn't align. So it is absolutely essential to make sure that sustainability requirements make it through that kind of specification and design side into the actual procurement engagement, because quite often the sustainability side of things can be at risk. It could be removed later on in a project delivery for cost or other reasons. And I think, we're yet to have an integrated procurement and sustainability function. I have worked in organizations where there's been specialist roles created to sort of bridge that gap. And really, I think it's helping procurement teams who are focused on cost, efficiency, security of delivery, security of supply. How do they also get the expertise of sustainability into their decision making? So I think it's about bridging the gap between those teams, but it doesn't naturally happen, particularly where we are yet to be able to fully describe what we want on sustainability. We're still setting, boundaries, parameters, and people are still looking at how much opportunity there is in certain areas that then makes it quite hard to set a firm procurement requirement. So you're needing to bring sort of nuance to a, a part in the project cycle that needs surety. So it can be a real challenge.
Mhm. Right. So procurement teams are not always traditionally seen as climate leaders. How can organization empower procurement professionals to play a stronger role in driving sustainability?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of the time it comes down to knowledge, and we haven't armed our procurement teams with all of the information they need on sustainability. I think particularly in larger organizations, those gaps are being bridged. There's a recognition, we have customer requirements, we have like broader sustainability requirements that need to be delivered. It's a mixture of upskilling, uh, bringing clarity to requirements and making it easier for procurement teams. It's also about maybe embedding some specialist resource in those teams. And ultimately, supply chain is about getting to know your suppliers more closely as well. I think sometimes relationships aren't as close as they could and should be, and actually, there's normally a bit of a lag in these requirements. Supply chains need time to catch up. Manufacturing businesses can't just flick a switch and change product, materials and route of supply. So I think it's coordination, prioritization, and also working really closely with the suppliers. When you're working really closely with supply chains, you see some suppliers have moved early, some are aware but maybe not sure about where to go, and some haven't started. And actually, that's not always mapped in where you need it to be in terms of how ready certain suppliers are to deliver. So again, understanding, but I think the big issue we have in procurement is there's never enough time. They're on the clock, and where you've got a constrained supply chain, it can be really difficult to respond to requirements. So, it's about expertise and trying to build as much capacity and time into the procurement process as you can.
Right. So, Ian, moving a bit different away from the questions, I was thinking about a problem which someone shared with me. So they mentioned that in an organization, I allocate budget to each team for procurement, and in the first 9 months, they don't order many things. But in the last 3 months of the year, when the financial year is closing, because they have the funds, they order at will anything. So this unevenness leads to procurements which are not very sustainable. Have you come across any such problems?
Uh, yeah, I mean, in some sectors, in some areas, there is like budget that you can use or lose, and that then affects your future budget availability. And I think with lots of kind of project-related procurement, there's like this initial plan that always seems to slip to the right-hand side. Things move backwards, and you can end up with like a fixed endpoint. I mean, it is really frustrating when procurement can't have some flexibility, and I have seen um, some issues where there's surplus budget at the end of the year, and it does affect sort of decision making. But I mean, in lots of those environments, they're also quite constrained by procurement rules. So there's a lot of things about who's allowed to work in those kind of, on those kind of projects and environments. And there's lots of rules about, what they need to meet to be able to be in that supply chain. So, I mean, I don't think, I think it's more about are these the best possible decisions? And when you have a ticking clock and a surplus budget, it is tricky. But I mean, I think providing good requirements are embedded and you've got the best possible supply chain, it does kind of mitigate some of those risks. But I mean, I've probably seen that a bit less in recent times. I think budgets across the board and the wider economics are so constrained that
Mhm.
I haven't seen people with money sloshing around at the end of a year or anything like that so much recently.
Mm.
But it can happen, I think. But
Mhm.
the more you embed requirements and clarity in your procurement process, the less likely that is to be a big issue. It's just more about timing and best
Right,
decisions.
right. Okay, so you have worked on adopting low carbon materials and innovative solutions. How can procurement strategies encourage the adoption of new sustainable technologies and materials?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think in that kind of question, it's are we if we're talking about innovation, it's kind of what do we mean by innovation? Because I think innovation is quite a broad scope term, and to some people, innovation has to be the first time it's ever been done, and to other people, it just means that we don't do it that often, or it's something that feels quite new. So that is a really broad kind of spectrum there, and it does kind of affect the kind of the appetite and the risk. I mean, for me, it's prioritization and looking at what do you regularly procure, where are your biggest impacts, what kind of solutions are available, and um, how ready are you for change? Some
Mhm.
organizations try to innovate when they don't have process or capacity to allow that innovation, quite constrained environments, zero risk on cost.
Mhm.
It is not a good place to try something you haven't done before, right? So I think it's trying to match solutions to the environment that you're working in. And if it is low risk environment, then you need to look at something that's you know clearly established as a product or service that you're going to have demand for. That that can be serviced, but will provide you with an actual reduction.
Mhm.
Whereas if you're in a more innovative space, there's a great chance to sort of cast the net a bit wider, even look at partnership or working with others. But I think I've seen people try and go big on innovation in an environment that doesn't support it. And I
Right.
think it's trying to get those things matched as well as possible.
Mhm. Right. So collaboration with suppliers is often key to reducing emissions. There are some practical ways companies can work with suppliers to improve sustainability across the value chain.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar really. Understanding availability, understanding capacity and supply. Um, One thing I don't think people do enough is really look at where there's the best alignment. I think sometimes um, things like carbon reduction can be based on what people have heard about recently, rather
Mhm.
than really looking at where are the impacts and how can that be structured the best for that organization. Um, I've been, working as part of the UK GBC Innovations and Solutions Group, as you mentioned, and um, working on their scaling initiative, and really trying to look at those common issues and where those enablers sit. So there's a UK GBC report on that coming out,
Mhm.
and that's really looking at these kind of enablers. But it is hard. It means change, and a lot of the time, organisations aren't really set up to change. They're set up to do what they did last time, and it is a bit of an issue really when you're looking
Mhm.
at this.
Okay. So digressing a bit, like I am thinking that the procurement team or the department, they are thinking about the future. They are not really understanding what their whole value chain is, where can there be gaps, or how can they better manage it. I think that needs some research or time on their behalf. But the company is running end to end, right? They don't have that much time. So do you see this comes across as a problem?
Yes, and I think it's how deep do you want to go into your supply chain as well. When you're looking at, you know, things like scale carbon reduction, your next tier of the supply chain might not have bought the raw materials, and it's probably the raw materials that have done that. So how far do you go? And then certain products and materials have very long supply chains, and if we look at broad scope sustainability, we start touching on things like human rights and what went on in the extraction and manufacture of those particular products and materials. So um, yeah, look, I completely agree. In an ideal world, we'd know we'd know lots about the provenance and where things came from, but really that level of transparency is a long, long way off in a lot of products and materials. So, and procurement teams have got a day job of getting value for money and getting
Yeah.
products delivered to
Yes.
projects that need them now. So yes, it is a massive challenge, and I think there's just not enough understanding of exactly where all these materials and products came from, and you know global supply chains are very complex. So you know that is daunting, but what do we need to do? Well, it's focus on the biggest priorities and look at the things that are directly within control and start to work with the supply chain to map that out. Your next tier of supply chain might not know themselves. So it's about a structured, prioritized approach to understanding the key risks in your supply chain and then taking a measured approach to reducing those risks and looking for improvements. It's not there's not a magic wand. It's about learning and engaging and but in a constrained where resources are constrained, which is in a lot of big organizations, you have to prioritize and you have to focus on where you know that there's the biggest issues. But again, the flip side of that is once you start addressing your big issues, it makes the smaller ones easier and you gather momentum and you get better understanding and the supply chain also begin to respond. So it's not impossible. The starting point is quite hard, but fundamentally it's about gaining a better understanding and addressing your biggest risks, which isn't really a sustainability issue. It's risk management and something that's applied across many other sectors.
Right, right. Yeah, it's a business issue.
Yeah, yeah.
Otherwise, they will go out of business if they don't address those things.
Absolutely, but again, if you have a problem, if you have a breach or you have like a product that actually is affecting your, what you're supplying to your customer, that could affect your business. So it is a business issue, but these risks, if they materialize, and I think as transparency and reporting improves, we'll see them materialize more often, could be catastrophic for your business if you're not managing it. So, I think we're probably just seeing another key strand of risk management sort of coming up the priority list, and it will just become something that businesses have to monitor closely, but we'll have to be balancing with all of the other competing
Yeah,
priorities that exist.
right, right, right. That's true. So, Ian, circular economy principles are increasingly discussed in the built environment. How can procurement practices help accelerate circularity in construction and infrastructure projects?
Yeah, well, I mean, at the moment, procurement practices aren't set up to support circular economy, and that is kind of one of the biggest issues that we're contending with in the world of circularity. We're geared up to service the linear economy, and
Mhm.
even things like how we insure and how we like warranty products is tied up in new. And if you're looking at circular economy challenges, you don't have to dig too deep before this. You know, these procurement barriers are major issues. So um, yeah, again, there's a lot of work happening to look at, insurances, warranties, um, but it's multiple stages, and you're kind of working in an economy that isn't prioritizing circularity. So, um, I mean, the best examples are relatively small scale, but they are sort of growing in number, and they are definitely paving the way. There's a number of organisations, and particularly in and around London, where there's like sort of real key initiatives that are happening. People are proving that it's possible, and these barriers are slowly being cleared. But it takes time because the industry is geared up to produce new. We don't generally have mechanisms to store and sort of retain materials and products in a temporary environment to then get them out again. So there's some inherent structure in how we work and how we deal with things like waste that make it more difficult. But there is a lot of energy and a lot of activity across the sector to really sort of look at this change. But um, it, examples can feel small, but they are so important. And everything starts small, and they just have to sort of build on it. But procurement wise, I think it's like opening the potential and the possibility for circularity solutions to be included. And then it's working a bit harder to think about what does the insurance, warranty, etc. kind of process look like. But depending on which materials and which markets, that there's some things that are harder than others. But I'm encouraged that action is, there is a lot of successes happening, but we're a long way off sort of fully scaled solutions in some areas, which means there's a lot of work still to do.
Right, right. So digital tools and ESG data are becoming more important in managing supply chains. Do you see technology helping organizations track and reduce supply chain emissions?
Yeah, well, I mean, broadly, I think decisions are not particularly data informed at this moment in time. Um, and obviously, we need to be in a position where we're able to make business cases and decisions based on data and knowledge. So, a lot of digital tools are effectively bringing data together, allowing people to report and measure against some of these things. I think in the construction sector, historically, there's been a lot of things like a lot of paper records, a lot of things that aren't compiled, a lot of things that are kind of like retained by subcontractors. So, in like sort of general contractor environments, they've not always had all of the data together to be able to make decisions. So, I mean, digital tools bring that data together. They allow better comparison, and it's supporting informed choices. And I think even today we're you know we're seeing a lot of decisions made with partial data, and as digital tools become more integrated and data is actually at the fingertips, we'll be able to be much more categoric about investment and decision makings around it. But unfortunately, the story's been sort of real data gaps and missing information. Again, going back to the scope 3 discussion, scope 3 is so hard because the data isn't quite there. There's a lot of people, and even the solutions that are on the market, there's a lot of solutions that say that they can sort this for you, but actually that data needs to be put into their system, and it's not that the data is getting that data there is the big challenge in some areas. So but as reporting increases, requirements increase, we're seeing better data come in, which is going to allow us to make much better decisions and choices in the future.
Right. So finally, Ian, looking ahead into the future, what changes do you expect to see in sustainable procurement and supply chain over the next decade, particularly in the built environment?
Well, I don't know if I can look a decade ahead, to be honest, because we're in like such a volatile and uncertain moment. At this moment in time, we've got global conflicts that are affecting, supply chains. We've got global tariffs moving around, and we've got increasing friction on trade. We're also seeing regulation around sustainability. We've got things like CBAM regulation coming in well, that's in force now in the EU, and we're going to have a version of that in the UK coming through. And all of those things are just going to add cost at to a sector that no one's saying, no one's saying, we're underpricing construction at the moment, but constrained customers, customer budgets and sort of government budgets are really restricted at the moment. Cost of construction rising, and it looks really challenging in the next, even the next 5 years. So we've got ambitious targets around 2030 and carbon reduction, but the backdrop is prices rising across key construction materials, steel, cement. So the next 5 years looks very, very, very challenging from a sustainability perspective, and I think it's going to be like really difficult. I mean, the flip side of that is, UK are building, we're building electric arc furnaces for our domestic steel production at the moment. They're not online yet, but things like that will give us pathways to supply lower carbon materials into UK market. But yeah, the sourcing and the supply chain, even for things like that, are not fully secured in the future. So yeah, it looks like it's going to be really volatile. I think we're going to see cost of construction projects increase, and the supply chains are going to be constrained, and we'll probably see things like CBAM impact lower carbon material availability as people want to buy more of those, so we're going to see a lot of dynamics affects cost in the supply chain, particularly for high volume primary construction materials, that are quite often high carbon in terms of production. There's a lot going on here that I think is going to mean that we're going to have to work really hard to make sure we deliver on sustainability commitments globally, and we're also going to have to see continued change and adoption in those supply chains. We're going to need further decarbonization in manufacturing, and I mean it's a major challenge. But I guess again, UK scenario, we're seeing the grid decarbonize. We've got strong commitments around that. But again, volatile to political landscape. So yeah, I think it's going to be a bumpy ride, if I'm honest with you. But there are strong commitments here. We've got businesses working really hard globally on sustainability and sustainable adoption. But I think we have some major challenges, and the world feels increasingly uncertain. So I think it looks like a challenge we have ahead of us.
Sounds good. So thank you for sharing with us the challenging circumstances we are entering for the next decade. And thank you again for this fascinating discussion. It is clear that procurement and supply chains are far more operational functions. They are powerful levers for driving meaningful climate impact, from supplier engagement and low carbon materials to circular economy strategies and data-driven decision making. The choices organizations make across their supply chain will play a major role in shaping a more sustainable built environment. Thank you for sharing your insights and experiences with us today. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on the Climate Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the podcast and share it with colleagues who are passionate about climate action, sustainability, and innovation. Until next time, take care and have a nice day. Bye-bye.